Populists are set to take over in Italy. They promise to bring millions of people out of poverty and deport hundreds of thousands of refugees. I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmaker is Italy's new government. Italy's five-star movement and the far-right anti-immigrant party, the League, won votes on the promise of a spending spree. Now, months on from the election, the two have formed a coalition, and their populist leaders say all Italians deserve a living wage and lower taxes. They've called the result of the March ballot the death of EU austerity. Their plans could very well lift the country out of record rates of poverty, but at what cost? Their political agreements also include the deportation of 500,000 refugees and locking down Italy's borders, through which this year alone more than 25,000 asylum seekers arrived on boats. In a moment, I'll ask Italy's former Foreign Minister, Emma Bonino, what she thinks about the direction her country is taking. But first, here's Haider Abbasi.
The next crisis for the European Union could come from one of its founding members, Italy. After weeks of talks following the general election in March, two populist parties have united, the Five Star Movement and the League, and they're staunchly anti-EU.
The European people, with the Italian vote, have taken a step closer to freedom from the constraints and cages that are bringing back to Europe hunger, instability and insecurity. The Italian vote allows us to rebuild a Europe founded on women and men rather than constraints and bureaucracy.
The man they put forward to be Prime Minister is an academic most people haven't heard of, Guissepe Conte. Some of the coalition's policies include billions of dollars in tax cuts, giving poorer families a monthly income of nearly $1,000, and reversing pension reforms that would lower the retirement age. So should Brussels be worried? The coalition hasn't given any details on how it's going to pay for all of this, and analysts warn such a spending spree would only increase Rome's deficit. The country's public debt is $2.7 trillion, or 132% of its GDP, the second highest in the region after Greece. Italy is the European Union's third largest economy, and a debt crisis there would impact the entire Eurozone. The Italian coalition is expected to challenge the EU on its foreign policy. One example is Russia. The populist leaders say they don't see Moscow as a military threat and want to have all EU sanctions lifted. Europe's relations with the Kremlin worsened after the annexation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014 and the recent poisoning of the former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal. In June, member countries will vote on whether to renew EU sanctions, and since all members must agree, Italy's opposition will bring those sanctions to an end. But closer to home, one of the alliance's most contentious proposals is what to do with refugees.
If
there are borders, the civil government should defend its borders. I make a call to officials of the Navy and Coast Guard. Save the lives you should save, but take them home. Take them home.
The League's Matteo Salvini is fiercely anti-immigration, and so are the policies of the alliance. Italy is the main destination for migrants travelling from North Africa and, along with Greece, has accepted the most. The coalition has made it a priority to deport 500,000 undocumented migrants and refugees living in Italy.
Yes, indeed, I fear these results because I've arrived here with all my thoughts and dreams, and I never thought that one day maybe I would have to go back or anything like that.
So is Italy entering a new era of hostility towards outsiders? And how will the EU deal with the country's new populists? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to Rome and speak to Senator Emma Bonino, who's a former EU Commissioner and also Italy's former Foreign Minister. Emma Bonino, welcome to The Newsmakers. You know the saying that people get the politicians they deserve. What do you think has happened in Italian politics and Italian society, indeed, to produce a recent history of election results that have given the country Silvio Berlusconi a prime ministership 3 times and now making a populist party the biggest single party in parliament?
Well, it's a long story that it's not useful for a short interview. And it's a change not only on sociology, but it's also a change in politics from a country that has a lot of problems, but it's also a rich country, especially in the north, where the stereotyping of giving all the problems responsibility to the European Union has been going on and on for years. And I think that the expectation of people, plus some problems, migration, for instance, the very fragile economic growth, as fed that grew together in a sort that were not addressed, in my opinion, in a clear way and in a responsible way by the pro-European parties.
Well, you mentioned migration and also slow economic growth. How far do you think the new government might go in pushing against EU, say, fiscal policies and policies, common agreements about migrants and immigration?
Well, reading from their program that, by the way, has been changing so often in the last days, if I read the Europe paragraph, that, by the way, comes number 29, the language has been, in recent days, softened, so it's much more acceptable from the language point of view. But basically, the question is that all the promises throughout the document on bonus to millions of people, reduction of taxes, etc., are totally incompatible with our budget that has a very huge budget hole and an enormous public debt, which is worrying the European Union. And also this statement that let's say, treaty on the fiscal union have to be reviewed, even if they say together with the European partners. But the structure of the European economic governance need to be reviewed, etc., etc. So it's in the same time vague enough and anti-European enough.
Are Italians racists?
Well, I think they are becoming more and more intolerant to poor people. They are also intolerant to Italian poor people, to white poor people, intolerant towards beggars, for instance. It's not only intolerance towards people who have a different skin. So I think that this is a cultural shift that has not been addressed in a proper way. And so in the rich north, for instance, people are becoming richer and richer and more intolerant, not only to foreigners, as I said, but also to people of a different approach on sexuality, for instance, against the Roma, and basically against all poor people.
Most of the world regards Italian politics as being dysfunctional. Do you think there's any cure for that?
Well, I think that the first cure is a proper electoral law. This situation in which we are is due mostly not only to the cultural and social change, but to absurd proportional law by which nobody wins the election, and meaning that from the after day of the election, you have to negotiate alliances in order to get a possible majority in parliament. And I do think that this is the starting point of a dysfunctional system as far as governability. And I think that for my country, the method of the French legislation would be appropriate. But of course, political parties rushed to a new electoral law by the end of December, which is basically a pure proportional law.
Emma
so
Bonino,
here we are.
No, please continue.
No, here we are in a sort of a confused and confusing situation.
Emma Bonino, we really appreciate your joining us here on The Newsmakers. Thank you very much. Let's open up the discussion now to our panel. We're joined from the Italian capital, Rome, by Valerio Bordonaro, who's worked at the Italian Foreign Ministry and the European Commission. And Robert Oulds is with us as well. Robert is in London. He directs the Bruges Group. It's a Eurosceptic think tank. Gentlemen, welcome to the Newsmakers. Valerio, what's your opinion of this alliance between the Five Star Movement and the League Party?
After the election, we had an inconclusive victory, and maybe that one was the only option. The League had to, withdraw from their alliance with Forza Italia and Fratelli d'Italia. This was the only option that they had. I'm not a big supporter of this idea, of their ideas, the ideas they bring in. But, well, now we are about to see what's going to happen. In 2 hours, maybe, the President of the Republic is going to give to Mr. Conte a chance. And then we'll see what's going to be said in the Parliament about that. But, criticism have raised, and I agree with 100%, maybe 90% of the criticism that arose. So let's give them now a couple of hours, couple of days maybe, to see what they're going to say. If they try to calm what's happening around Italy now, it's understandable that Europe, the financial world, is worried about it. But let's see. I'm still confident that Italy has enough democratic counterbalance powers to avoid the apocalypse that should be supposed to happen if we look at the public declaration that Five Star Movement and League did during these years. So I'm quite confident that apocalypse will not happen, but let's say in a couple of hours.
Robert, you were shaking your head there. So over to you. What were you shaking your head about?
Well, it's the same project fear that we had in Britain regarding the Brexit referendum, that if we don't do as the European Union says, if you have alternative policies, then, of course, there would be some catastrophe, or your previous guest describing it as the apocalypse. What is happening is that the European Central Bank has already issued a warning to Italy. They've already started a confrontation. The Italian voters clearly want to have more social protections for those who are unemployed. They want to have measures to restart their economy. Their economy has been blighted for more than a decade now by, of course, the euro and the austerity measures designed to underpin the euro, the measures which are designed to deflate the economy and, of course, created massive unemployment and at the same time expanded the debt. The European Union system is failing, and it's certainly failing Italy. Italy should be forging ahead and have a different way of doing things, their own currency perhaps, or at least their own fiscal policy, where they are allowed to restart their economy, not this deflationary measures forced upon them by Germany and the European Central Bank, which is actually making the debt worse. The Italian people want change, they're entitled to change, and it's the inevitable consequence of a failed European Union policy. It's not the apocalypse, it's a new start. It's something new to Europe. It's called democracy.
Okay, actually, I could put this next question to both of you, but let's start with you, Valerio. Picking up on what Robert said, how much of the election result was about the European Union, and how much was it about the supporters of these two parties in the coalition only worried about their own interests and Italy's national interests, or are the two so interconnected you cannot divide Italy's national interests with the EU?
Well, that's absolutely true. You cannot divide Italian national interest with the EU. And it's also true that EU was an issue, was a topic of this electoral campaign. But at the same time, I'm quite sure that the vote was not against EU. It was a vote against fear. It was a vote against the political system but not directly to EU. Imagine that the Northern League was in a coalition not 100% Eurosceptic, that their allies were Forza Italia, and they were supposed to propose as Prime Minister Antonio Tajani, who is the President of the European Parliament. So I'm not quite sure that the vote is 100% against the European Union. And what I want to say in addition to that is that, you know, the sentiment pro-Europe is still higher than the percentage of voters for this coalition, not coalition, these two parties. So the point is not EU at this stage in this electoral campaign, but it's a
Okay.
Sorry?
Yeah, no problem, Valerio. Don't worry. Robert wanted to say it's against EU policy. So, Robert, let's come back to you. Let's talk about two specific issues. The coalition may go against, they haven't totally decided yet exactly what they're going to do in terms of their fiscal policy. They have a desire to give a universal wage to everybody to help lift people out of poverty. If they do that, for example, just one thing, they could possibly bring Italy close to bankruptcy, and then not only would that be against EU policy, that spending policy, it would then require the EU to presumably give some financial assistance to Italy. So the parties have really rode back a lot on their anti-EU rhetoric in the build-up to the election, and now comes the reality of having to govern. You're surely not suggesting that everything is going to be anti-EU, is it?
There would hopefully be a change of policy, and that the European Union is not just about bankruptcy. It's if Italy breaks the 3% rule, the Growth and Stability Pact, and the fiscal concept. There's a whole raft of European Union measures designed to constrain democratic governments in how much they can tax and how much they can spend, and the proportion between the two. These policies have so far failed. So there needs to be a new approach. And so the European Union needs to back down. Otherwise, there could be a major crisis because Italy is too big to fail. They can't treat Italy, surely, the same way they treated Greece, a much smaller country with a smaller economy. Greece, of course, was bullied by the European Union and made to conform to the most severe austerity measures, which all they did was really bail out banks, particularly German banks, that have lent Greece money. Italy is just too big an economy to go down that path. And hopefully the Italian people would say, no, we are not going to tolerate such measures, because otherwise there'll just be more debt growing as a result of a declining economy. Italy should, as I said, be forging ahead, and it would be if it wasn't constrained by the euro and the requirements that underpin the euro. It needs a new economic approach, and that's absolutely fair. And the European Union, although they've started this building, need to back down. Otherwise, there could well be a major confrontation, but it would be the European Union that would lose, because ultimately Italy has the potential to forge ahead. It has the creativity, it has an industrial backbone in terms of northern Italy that can power ahead if indeed it has the right economic policies. So far, the European Union hasn't delivered them. So a new approach is indeed needed and will be to their benefit. And this could well be the unravelling of the single currency, but this is in the long term. Nothing drastic will happen in the immediate future.
Valerio, do you think if the coalition gains enough confidence over time, Italy may eventually come out of the Eurozone and stop using the common currency?
I think this will not happen. I think this will not happen. It will involve a big change in our constitutional laws. And about what was saying Robert before, you know, the measures that they propose now are quite interesting. The point is that they're supposed to spend more than 100 billion euro, but they're not self-financing. So there's no way they can do this kind of things. And it's not, again, a thing of being treated like Greece. The point is that if the debt become bigger and bigger, this debt will become impossible to manage for our son, for our nephew or grandson. This is not the case. This will not be the case in Italy. It's impossible now to do this kind of things. And it's not only about EU. It is about you know, being a little bit sensible when proposing something. And in this case, this is not possible. We have an independent observatory that estimated in 100 billion expenses, but only $500 million in new income for the state. This is not possible. This is mathematics. It's numbers. They will have to change something in their proposals, and you see that what was called the reddito di cittadinanza, so the universal income, is no longer like they proposed it. Now it's more or less like an unemployment pay. Something is changing because they are getting closer and closer to the responsibility, and they have to think very careful about it.
Sure, they still want to pay $920 for to each impoverished family. But, OK, the other issue worth discussing in terms of Italy's relations with the EU is immigration, because there are common policies that the EU lays down. The coalition says it wants to deport 500,000 illegal immigrants. Valerio, do you think that the European Union has failed Italy in providing it enough support with all of these migrants who have been coming through the south from North Africa?
Yes, and this I agree with the question. Europe is failing in supporting Italy, Greece, and Spain in this effort. But I want to be more precise about that. I think, again, it's not a European failure in the sense of the European institutions, but it's the European member states. They are not doing their duty in supporting each other. So, yes, Italy is right in asking more from Europe, asking for more support in that situation. But the point of sending back 500,000 people, that's not a solution. That's not a feasible solution.
Sure. OK, one more question about the European Union before we speak about the man that was mentioned right at the top of the discussion, Guissepe Conte, the Prime Minister-to-be, potentially. Robert, do you think that possibly this coalition in Italy might form some sort of alliance with the Eurosceptic far-right party in Hungary and its equivalent in Austria to pressure the EU further in terms of the policies that the right wing of European politics would like to see?
Well, you're absolutely correct to spot this division that's emerging within Europe. You have the European establishment dominated by, of course, Chancellor Merkel of Germany, who, of course, wants countries to take more migrants. Countries such as Poland, Hungary, Austria, as you mentioned, there is strong antipathy to more and more immigration, this uncontrolled surge which came into the European Union, people trying to ultimately get to Germany and to countries such as Sweden. And countries such as Italy have borne the brunt of that. The mafia have turned it into a estimated $6 billion industry. People smugglers have arguably, according to some people in Italy, been cooperating with the NGOs that are bringing people in, and the Italian people are rightly fed up. And it's these European Union rules that are largely responsible because, of course, these lacks borders, or no borders, rather, in the European Union. So people hope to get to Italy and then to get to other countries. And Italy can't actually deal with this. And it's absolutely common sense that Italian people have had enough. And of course, under European Union rules, the Dublin regulations of how to deal with asylum and immigrants, it's the first country that they go to that's meant to give the support to migrants. And that, of course, in this case, is Italy. So Italy isn't so much being let down by other countries. It's the European Union rules which are letting down Italy, at the same time encouraging more and more people in that are just creating disharmony and social problems and putting the economy further at risk, because this is a drain that Italy can't afford. So it is naturally common sense, really, that ultimately there is going to be this alliance between Viktor Orban in Hungary, a new Italian government, and, of course, the authorities in Poland, who are deeply, deeply concerned. And they're actually far more in tune with popular opinion than, of course, the European Union. So this is going to be a major confrontation, a major rift, a schism even, that's emerging in the European Union. And it can't be business as usual. Borders need to be returned for security reasons, to stop the migration. And, of course, we shouldn't be encouraging more people to leave their homelands, because it's ultimately bad for their countries. It's bad for developing nations.
OK. Just finally, in 30 seconds, Valerio, if you can, what's happening with Guissepe Conte? His CV seems to suggest that he quite likes to embellish the truth. It has so many half-truths in it that no one really knows what his qualifications are, apart from the fact he's never held political office and he could become the next prime minister.
Well, that's a very interesting story about Guissepe Conte. You know, what we know for sure is a law professor, but where he studied or where he teaches, that's not possible to know it right now. We'll see. Many journalists are doing fact-checking about his resume. I'm quite skeptical about him. I'm sure he's a good person, but you know, if you've never done anything in politics, why would you become the prime minister? How can you do it? Maybe the serious risk, is that you're going to be nothing like just a puppet in the hands of the two leaders.
Okay.
And I think and I hope Italians don't like this situation.
Valerio and Robert, really appreciate your appearing on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up on the Newsmakers, daring to drive. A month before Saudi Arabia lifts its ban on women driving, the kingdom detains human rights activists. Just how genuine are the Crown Prince's reforms? And we'll speak to the head of Moqtada al Sadr's political bloc in Iraq and try to pin down how the Shia cleric plans to run the country. Saudi Arabia's decision to lift a decades-old ban on women driving was supposed to be proof that the rise of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was paving the way for a new, more progressive era. But in the past few days, Saudi police have arrested at least 9 activists who campaigned for the rights of women. Rights groups have been quick in their condemnation, asking, is prison the price of freedom in the kingdom? Shoaib Hassan reports.
Another crackdown on human rights in one of the most authoritarian states in the world. At least 9 activists have been arrested in Saudi Arabia for championing women's rights and free speech. It's happened just weeks before the kingdom's ban on women driving is to be lifted. It's part of a set of reforms initiated by the powerful Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But critics worldwide say the changes don't go far enough.
Saudi Arabia, it remains one of the worst countries in the world in terms of its human rights records. So we want to see a real change in that respect. And we're hoping that Macron will put pressure on Mohammed bin Salman to push for further advancement in that regard.
But international pressure appears to have had little effect. Those arrested include Lujain al-Hatlu. He is a fierce critic of the kingdom's guardianship laws. They allow male relatives to limit women's rights to marry, travel and work. Saudi human rights activists took to Twitter to protest it. One of the most prominent was Manal al-Sharif. He tweeted that the official statement accused 3 of the activists of treason against Saudi Arabia. I'm speechless, disappointed and concerned. The only treason they committed was against the inhumane male guardianship system in Saudi, was against the patriarchy my countrywomen live under, was against denying them the full citizenship as Saudis. So, is the soon-to-be-lifted driving ban just window dressing for the world? And is the promised change to be made on the terms of the conservative monarchy and not the general public? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Joining us now from Riyadh is Saudi Arabian Affairs Specialist Ahmed Al-Ibrahim, and in Amman in Jordan, Hiba Zayedin is there for us. She's a researcher with Human Rights Watch's Middle East and North Africa division. Welcome to the Newsmakers, both of you. Ahmed, if I can start with you. Just as Saudi Arabia is about to lift the ban on women driving, it's arrested these activists. It doesn't really, to the outside world, make sense. What's the explanation?
The explanation is very easy. First of all, there's no link between those people and the initiative of driving. See, the problem is with the foreign media is they look at this initiative as if it's coming as power or a pressure from the human rights activists or from different countries. This decision was taken upon the Saudi people by the Saudi rulers to best suit this kingdom. So the incident happened a couple of days ago. It was a pure incident. Couple individuals, they've been charged with treason. They've been trying to infiltrate the steps and the transformation that this country is doing. And it's going into a very, very fast speed. Those individuals has been warned more over and over and over and over. And then when they've been actually, you know, the government reached their limit, they had to detain them and see, you know, what's feed these fueling, why they are talking to foreign sources, why they are trying to claim things that it's not within the society, why they are trying to shake the fabric social society of this country. We are going through a very important time. We are trying to take a smart system steps in order to achieve. We've done so many things in the past 3 years, and we're just going to do more. So the last thing is you want to have these little individuals, or as I call them, the little Snowdens, try to do some stuff to destabilize the social fabric. You know, if I would tell your customers and your individual, if they can ping the criminal record, for example, for Jane Al-Hadloul from Canada, or they can ping her YouTube channels, you would see one of them, what is kind of person that we're dealing with. Those people are, unfortunately, they don't contribute anything to the society except being, you know, shake the social fabric. They want to be in fame. Like it's an individual who would like to throw themselves in front of a speeding bus and claim victory. This is not going to happen.
Okay, Ahmed, sorry, are you saying it's therefore just a coincidence that these activists have been detained while there was that to and fro going on social media, and mainly men saying to the women that you will never drive, and then the women saying, yes, we will drive? Is it just a coincidence they were arrested and detained then?
There is no coincidence. You are talking to an individual that once upon a time I did tweeted that, you know, women should drive. I would like to see my mom drive. I would like to see my sister drive. But that doesn't mean I go shakes and talk to foreign media and try to take reporters or try to bribe somebody in the government in order to give heads up on when things needs to happen. See, there's different. If you are in it for the best for the country, you're going to succeed. If you're in it to bring fame or trying to stabilize the social fabric, you're going to end up in jail in this country.
Okay, Hiba, over to you. What do you know about these detentions?
So I'd like to start with the fact that these women are internationally renowned for their activism in Saudi Arabia. They're very well-respected women. They're professors, writers, intellectuals. Iman al-Nabjan, one of the women that has been named as arrested, who's been arrested, is, you know, has written countless times for international outlets and on women's rights issues. And arrests seem to largely be happening as a way to silence these critics of MBS's reform campaign, in particular because these women have not only demanded the lifting of the driving ban, which is long overdue, but also for their work on advocating for other basic rights. I don't see how these accusations, which are broad, they're vague, they're catch-all phrases used to repress any form of dissent or expression in Saudi Arabia. There's really nothing remarkable about being in contact with international media outlets. And so I think to accuse these women of harming the safety and security of Saudi Arabia simply because they're demanding basic rights is honestly ludicrous. And, you know, especially now that MBS is branding himself as a reformer and a supporter of women's rights and women's advancement in Saudi society.
Hiba, does anybody know where the women are being held? Is there any news since they were detained?
So far, according to Saudi activists, they're being held incommunicado, so they have not been able to contact their families or lawyers.
Ahmed, are there many similar current cases in Saudi Arabia of rights activists being detained? I mean, you've been telling us the line that's coming from the Interior Ministry that there are certain accusations against these particular rights activists. Are there others in a similar situation? Do you know?
Actually, there is none. If anybody would work for this country and follow the guidelines of Saudi Arabia and follow the guidelines of the religion, which is Islam, which is this country is all about, and the Shia, which is this country is all about. This is the biggest human right law in Saudi Arabia. But if I'm going to work against my country and I'm going to do all kinds of stuff, and there are things that the media can talk about it, and there are things they can't. But of course, if you are going to work against the system and against the government and what the initiative and the transformation is going through, you're going to end up like that. If Lujain al-Hadlul and the activists, by the way, they are three women and 4 men. I think the men are equal to the women. In Saudi Arabia, actually, we are not sexist anymore. We got over the women and men. They are compete together. They are on the jobs together. They equally paid together. So as much of those 7 people, and I'm not going to differentiate whether men and women, they are activists as they brand themselves, or internationally they brand them. In Saudi Arabia, there are so many activists. You talk about things within the guidelines of the kingdom and the government, to the best use to the people and to the government. But if you're going to look like Kelly Osbourne and you want to be in Saudi Arabia walking without abaya, this is not going to happen now. Wake up. I mean, until we won't allow, as much as we are trying to be westernized, or we're going to be westernized in our own model, we're not going to accept any Western push to our system. We are Saudis, we are Muslims, and our brand is going to be Saudis. We don't need any Western country to tell us what's right and what's wrong to do in this country.
Hiba, it is true that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, has introduced a number of reforms since he's become, shall we say, the main decision maker behind his father, King Salman. Is there any reason to doubt the sincerity of those? Ahmed is saying that these detentions are for a very particular purpose and don't reflect the reforms that are happening in the country.
I think the reforms that have been promised and that have been introduced are very limited in scope so far. The male guardianship system, which is the most serious impediment to women's rights in Saudi Arabia, is still largely intact. And I think, despite these promises of reform, I mean, the driving ban was long overdue to have been lifted, honestly. And so I still think...
Can I interrupt here, please?
Okay, go on, and then I'll come back to you here, but don't worry, I will let you finish your train of thought. Ahmed, go ahead.
I mean, the issues are travel ban and guardianship. Saudi Arabia is allowed, women is going to drive in a couple days, for God's sake. The male guardian system, it needs time to get. So, women are already traveling through the airport within the consent of their guardians. It's not restricted in the airport, but the law is not out there yet. So we allowed women driving. Guardianship is going to happen. What's next? What's on the file?
Okay.
What's going to happen?
Okay.
It's not enough. Listen, the problem is with the Western media and human rights, one thing, don't compare or do your benchmark about Saudi Arabia to perfection, because there's no other country in the world is perfect. If I were you, I would focus on the humanitarian issues in the workforce in Qatar, or the people who's getting executed in Iran, or the generals who's getting executed in Turkey.
Okay, Ahmed, the world's media is looking at those stories. At the moment, you're here to talk to us about Saudi Arabia. Hiba, over to you.
Just to make the headlines.
Okay.
Right now, we're talking about these really grave and concerning arrests. That's what we're talking about. The male guardianship system has not been abolished yet. That is absolutely fact right now. It has not been abolished. Women still require approval from their male guardians to make a range of critical decisions, including traveling outside the country, renewing their passports, and even getting married and being released from prison. So this system is still intact, and it is still the greatest impediment to women's rights activists. I think what matters today, what we need to be talking about today, is how grave these arrests have been and this escalating crackdown on women's rights activists, which honestly has been shocking to us, given the rhetoric of Mohammed bin Salman, especially as he was doing his whirlwind public relations tour in the US and in the UK.
Okay, Ahmed, so it's my understanding that if these women are found guilty, they could get 20 years in prison, possibly worse. When do you think the government is going to announce that they've been given access to lawyers and that they will be allowed to present their cases in the way that they would like, that international law presumably would like to see happen, at least given access to lawyers?
As you know, Saudi Arabia is part of the G20, and Saudi Arabia is abided by the world law. And by Saudi Arabia actually go and picking up these individuals, actually this is the last resort that the Saudi government would do. They have enough evidence on those people to charge them with treason. They already maybe have access to lawyers preparing the case, trying to detain them for a bigger look into the case. So the kingdom and the law over here is on their side. The government are much on mercy from an individual is charged with treason in Saudi Arabia rather than somebody who is in charge of treason in the United States. So the law is going to take its time. It's on the government clock to decide when it's going to happen, but it's happening because those individuals, they have rights in their prisons, and it's going to happen when it's going to happen. Just I want to go back to your guest for the guardianship. The guardianship, we're not going to do the guardianship on the clock.
Okay, no, Ahmed, I haven't got time for that, really, honestly, because time is out. Seriously, Ahmed, time is out, but Hiba, I'll give you 30 seconds to sum up your thoughts about this. Just 30 seconds.
Okay, it is clear that this was a calculated move to shut down all activism in the country that calls for anything that doesn't fit into MBS's reform campaign. These women should be celebrated, not punished. They should be partners in a real reform in Saudi Arabia, not publicly slandered and viciously slandered in local state media as they are today, being branded traitors, which honestly is ludicrous if you look at the records of these women and what they have contributed to Saudi society. They are pillars of Saudi society.
Saudi is trying to be a meritocracy society.
Okay, we got it. Hiba Zayedin and Ahmed Al Brahim, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Our hand is extended and our door is open to anyone as long as they want to build a nation. It should be an Iraqi decision to be sovereign over its territory and people. God willing, we will work quickly towards achieving the aspirations and hopes of our people.
Members of the Iraqi political bloc headed by the Shia cleric Moqtada al Sadr have reportedly been contacted by the United States. Sadr's Mahdi army was behind an uprising against American troops after Saddam Hussein was toppled in 2003. Now, his shock victory in this month's parliamentary elections may force two bitter enemies to work together. And how might that work? Well, to answer that and more, let's speak to Dia Al-Asadi. He's the director of Moqtada al Sadr's political office. He also heads Sadr's Al-Arar bloc in the Iraqi parliament. Mr. Asadi, welcome to the Newsmakers. You indeed are the man who told the Reuters news agency that the Americans have been in touch. What did they want to talk about?
Our talk with the Americans, we don't have any communication channels with the Americans. Since 2003, we have taken the position of resistance because the American occupation for us was the existence of unwanted international power or international soldiers or troops on the Iraqi soil. And it was by the very definition of the United Nations and by the Americans themselves, it was defined as occupation. So we resisted that occupation. Even after our participation in the political process, we thought that the Americans have not withdrawn completely from Iraq. They still have a considerable number of soldiers. And we think that the occupation is still in Iraq. They tried to send some intermediaries to negotiate with the Sadr's movement, but none of them was received. And we said that we don't have any relationship with them. We don't have any open channels with them. And this is going to be our position regarding any international existence in Iraq, whether it is American or otherwise, because Iraq is a sovereign country, and the decision of Iraq should be an Iraqi decision.
But Washington admits to having just over 5,000 troops in Iraq. The real number is believed to be closer to 7,000. Are you saying you refuse to work with the Americans in terms of Iraq's common interests?
No, actually, we sent several messages to all our partners and the friends, the international friends, the European Union countries, that any military existence in Iraq should be regulated by the Iraqi laws. And if the existence is not legislated or allowed by the Iraqi laws, then we will consider it as occupation. And the next government, we are working very hard to make the institutions or the military institutions and security institutions capable enough to take hold of all the responsibilities that require the existence of international troops. We know very well that there are some trainers sent by our friends from different countries, and the existence of these trainers is very much appreciated by Iraqis. But we look forward to having a powerful Iraqi army, a powerful Iraqi security institutions that are capable of controlling the situation.
Okay, if you don't mind, sir, just one more question about the Americans, then we'll talk about the politics in Iraq. But I want to get this clear. Are you, the Sadrist movement, demanding the withdrawal of American troops from Iraq?
Yes, we demanded this, and we are keeping demanding. This is one of our main demands, that any military troops should withdraw from Iraq, whether they are American troops or other troops. Because Iraq is now is a free country, and the Iraqi army, the people of Iraq have proved that they are capable of defeating Daesh, which is one of the fiercest and heinous gangs ever seen in history. The Iraqi people were capable of fighting them and defeating them. So if any country would like to empower the Iraqi army, then this is very much going to be appreciated by the Iraqi government, introducing a new technology, security by providing information, security information, but not sending military troops to Iraq. This is a very much sensitive issue, not just for Iraqis, but even for the neighboring countries. It creates so many problems that we don't need really at this particular time.
Will the Sadrist movement consider using force to expel American troops from Iraq?
Well, it depends on how we are going to deal with the American forces. Sayyid Moqtada al Sadr would like to abide by legal, framework or legal, I would say, the regulations that are accepted by all Iraqi partners. We are not going to resort to army or to military confrontation. We would like this to happen within legislations, within the boundaries of or the framework of the legal institution, and then it should be under the parliament as well. It should be endorsed by the parliament. It is not going to be a unilateral decision taken by His Eminence or by the followers of Sa'irun. It should be a national decision taken by all Iraqi partners, because now we believe that the Iraqi government should be the government that decides or that takes the decision of peace and war and other serious decisions like these.
What's the latest news you can give us in terms of the talks that are taking place to form a new government?
Still, we are at the first stage of negotiation. His Eminence Sayyid Moqtada al Sadr is meeting some political leaders, and I think at this level there will be no details discussed, because it is the case that details are going to be referred or transferred into some subcommittees that result from the first meetings at this level. So the talks are right now about the principles and the main conditions each political party or political leader have in mind, and they would like to set as the general framework for any future agreement.
Will the Sadrist movement consider the new government its government that represents its particular interests, or is there a very critical issue for Iraqis that the Sadrist movement shares, that it should represent all interests, especially, of course, sectarian interests?
No, of course, the Sadrist movement now is part of the broad coalition called Sa'irun, and Sa'irun is composed of other components than the Sadrist movement. There's the Communist Party, the liberals, the civic movement leaders. So it is in a way, it represents all the components of the Iraqi society. The Sadrist movement, or even the Sadrist followers, do not want an Iraqi government that is dominated by the Sadrists. They would like to see an Iraqi government that represents all Iraqis. And this is one of the points that His Eminence Sayyid Moqtada al Sadr highlighted and focused upon in all his meetings. He said, I invite all partners. My doors are open to all partners to come and participate in the coming government, but they should obey, or they should abide by the rules that we are going to propose. And one of these rules is to leave once and for all the sectarian alliances, and to put an end to some of the bad practices that were very familiar since 2003. One of them is the quota system. The other principle, for example, he mentioned the influence of neighboring countries and some of the powers, world powers. He didn't want any Iraqi coalition or political leader to be under the influence of any power outside Iraq. So he wanted a government that represents people, that comes from the people, and that serves Iraq and the Iraqi interests in the first place.
Moqtada al Sadr is considered now to be the kingmaker, and that he'll have the bigger say in who will be the next prime minister. Give us a personal insight into what he's like as a man. Is he a calm person? Is he a delegator? Does he make decisions by decree? Does he do it by consensus? What's he like?
Well, as I said, we are in the beginning of the negotiation stage. So partners have to agree on certain criteria according to which they can nominate the prime minister or other members of the cabinet. So far, I think the talk is about the general principles, how the prime minister can be selected and what qualifications he or she should have. And if a certain person is going to be nominated, what are the necessary requirements or necessary issues he has to address or she has to address. I mean, these are the basic requirements and the general requirements. Then we can talk about the details in a later stage when there are subcommittees formed and these subcommittees meet and every political party or political leader put their own conditions and they say that we need to negotiate this issue and that issue.
Dia Al-Asadi, thank you for joining us on The Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, after months of bitter debate, Ireland prepares to vote on whether it should legalise abortion. Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.